Kyle Busch spent his entire career making sure his family would never have to worry. Not about money. Not about the future. Not about what life would look like when the racing was finally over. Every championship, every lap, every contract, all of it pointed toward one simple human goal. When the driving stopped, his wife and children would be safe. So he did what any responsible man does when he has the means to protect the people he loves. He sat with financial advisors. He reviewed projections. He signed documents with the name Pacific Life on the letterhead. He paid $10.4 million in premiums. And he lost $8.5 million of it. The question nobody could answer at the time, the question Kyle himself could barely believe, was this: how does a two-time NASCAR champion, a man who built a career calculating risk at 200 miles per hour, end up financially ambushed by an insurance policy he bought to protect his family? Kyle Busch died on May 21, 2026. He was 40 years old. And this is the story of what happened to the money, and why it matters to every American who has ever been told their future was secure. There is a version of Kyle Busch most people think they know. The aggressive driver. The man who won 2 NASCAR Cup Series championships and 200 races across the major series, a number so staggering it sounds invented. The man his rivals called too intense, too hungry, too everything. But there was another version. A quieter one. The version his wife Samantha knew better than anyone. They married in 2010. They built a real life, 2 children, Lennox and Brexton, a home in Charlotte, and careers that both demanded everything. Samantha founded Rowdy Energy, a beverage company she grew into national distribution with the same relentless discipline her husband applied to the track. By any honest measure, they were a success story. A family that had done everything right. And Kyle had one fear. Not the wall. Not the competition. Not the end of a career that had defined him since before he was old enough to vote. His fear was quieter and more universal than anything he faced at speed. What happens to my family when I stop racing? He said it plainly in interviews. The way men speak when they've decided the pretense of invulnerability isn't worth the cost. He wanted Samantha protected. He wanted his children protected. He wanted to be the kind of man who planned ahead. So he made a plan. And the plan destroyed $8.5 million. But here's where it gets strange, because the weapon used against him was dressed as a gift. The product is called an Indexed Universal Life Policy. 3 letters, IUL, that sound unremarkable. The kind of acronym that lives in fine print and brochures nobody reads. Here is how it's sold. And the selling matters as much as the product itself. An Indexed Universal Life Policy is marketed as permanent life insurance with an extraordinary bonus feature: the ability to accumulate cash value tied to the performance of a stock market index. Not directly invested in the market. Tied to it. Protected on the downside. Participation in the upside. Tax-free growth. A retirement vehicle disguised as a protection instrument. Safety and growth in the same package, wrapped in the legitimacy of a life insurance contract. It sounds frankly extraordinary. And in finance, as in racing, anything that sounds extraordinary without complication is either misunderstood or misrepresented. Kyle sensed it himself. He looked at the projections and something in him hesitated. But here is the architecture of the trap. The IUL market operates in a regulatory space distinct from traditional investments. The projections advisors use to sell these policies, the charts, the hypothetical growth, the numbers showing what your cash value might become over 20 or 30 years, are not regulated the same way securities illustrations are. They can use assumptions that favor the seller. They can show you a version of your financial future optimized not for your outcome, but for the commission attached to your signature. The fees inside an IUL are layered and quiet. Cost of insurance charges, administrative fees, surrender charges, spread charges that silently reduce your participation in any index gains. And the participation rates, the percentage of index growth you actually receive, can be adjusted by the insurance company over time. The ceiling on your gains can move. What looked generous in year 1 can look very different in year 10. And consider this. In May of 2024, more than a year before the Busch lawsuit was filed, a jury in Idaho ordered Pacific Life to pay $1.5 million to a retired man in a separate IUL case. A different victim. The same company. And yet the policies kept being sold. Would you sign a contract knowing that? Most people wouldn't. But most people were never told. Kyle Busch was not told. He trusted the people explaining it to him. He trusted the Pacific Life email addresses on the documents. He trusted the projections that promised his family's future were secure. He was a racing driver, not a securities attorney. He was a man who spent his professional life trusting the engineers and strategists who kept him alive at speed, because you cannot drive 200 miles per hour and simultaneously audit the telemetry yourself. You extend trust. You rely on expertise. You believe the people whose job is to protect you are actually protecting you. Pacific Life had a different job. And what happened next, what Kyle said when he finally understood what had been done, is something that deserves to be read slowly. He said it himself. Not through a lawyer. Not through a press release. In his own voice, with the blunt directness of a man who had never learned to answer any other way. I looked at it, he said, and was like, this sounds too good to be true. But you've got to believe in those that are looking at it for you and trusting in the people with Pacific Life email addresses that are sending you the documents. He knew. At some level, in the back of whatever instinct had kept him alive on tracks where the margin for error was measured in milliseconds, something whispered that the numbers were too clean, that the projections were too generous, that the gap between what was being promised and what the world normally delivers was wider than it should have been. And then he trusted anyway. Because that is what every one of us does when we sit across from someone who speaks the language of financial security with fluency and confidence. We override the whisper. We tell ourselves the doubt is our own ignorance rather than legitimate caution. We sign. He called it a financial snare. Not a bad investment. Not an underperforming product. A snare. The word of a man who had processed what happened and arrived at the only conclusion the evidence would support, that this was not an accident of markets or timing. That something had been constructed. And Kyle Busch was not alone in that conclusion. His attorney, Robert Ricard, understood what the lawsuit represented beyond the Busch family's specific loss. This is not just an issue for celebrities or professional athletes, Ricard said. It is an issue for everyday Americans, teachers, small business owners, and retirees being sold complex life insurance contracts as if they were simple, risk-free retirement plans. Think about who is on that list. Teachers who spent careers serving others and reached retirement hoping what they had saved would be enough. Small business owners who sacrificed the security of steady employment to build something of their own. Retirees at the end of a lifetime of work with no runway left to recover from a catastrophic loss. Kyle had resources most of those people will never have. He had lawyers. He had a platform. He had a name that generated national headlines. Most of the people on that list have none of those things. And that is precisely why what he chose to do next matters so much. The lawsuit landed in October of 2025. Kyle and Samantha Busch versus Pacific Life Insurance Company, filed in North Carolina, grounded in the state's Unfair and Deceptive Trade Practices Act, quantifying losses exceeding $8.58 million on premiums paid in excess of $10.4 million. The numbers were not the story. The numbers were the evidence. The story was what those numbers revealed about a system. Pacific Life said very little publicly. The company retreated into the careful silence of legal counsel and corporate communication strategy. They did not admit wrongdoing. They did not deny the substance of the allegations in public. They did what large institutions do when confronted with accountability they cannot absorb through reputation alone. They negotiated. And then on February 26, 2026, they settled. The terms were confidential. That word is doing significant work here, and it deserves to be held up to the light. A confidential settlement means the amount recovered was never disclosed. It means Kyle and Samantha Busch walked away under terms neither side was permitted to discuss publicly. We do not know how much was recovered. We cannot know. What we know is what Pacific Life said in their only public statement. Both sides worked constructively to achieve a confidential result that is mutually acceptable and avoids further legal proceedings. Mutually acceptable. The language of resolution without accountability. The language of a closed door. But here is what makes that silence land differently now than it did in February. Kyle Busch signed that settlement agreement 3 months before he died. He died on May 21, 2026, not from anything the lawsuit could have anticipated. Not from anything connected to the financial battle he had fought and resolved. He died from severe pneumonia that progressed to sepsis. A 40-year-old man who had survived 20 years of professional racing at speeds that should have killed lesser drivers, taken by something invisible, something bacterial, something that did not care about championships or courtrooms or the $10.4 million he had paid in premiums. 3 months between signing the settlement and dying. Consider what that means for the shape of this story. A man spends years trusting a system designed to protect his family. He loses $8.5 million to that system. He finds the courage to fight back publicly, at considerable personal and professional cost. He reaches a resolution he cannot fully discuss. And then he dies before the world can see what that resolution meant. The financial battle is over. The terms are sealed. And the man who fought it is gone. What remains is the question he raised, the question every teacher and small business owner and retiree deserves an answer to. Who is watching the people who sell these products? Samantha Busch is 40 years old. She is a founder, a businesswoman, and a mother of 2 children, Lennox, 12, and Brexton, 11, who are now navigating the particular silence of a home where their father's voice no longer fills the rooms. She is not a woman who breaks easily. But here is what she is carrying. The grief of a 16-year marriage. The management of an estate whose full shape the public will never entirely know, because the settlement signed 3 months before her husband's death is sealed behind a confidentiality agreement the law does not require her to open. 2 children who watched their father fight a corporation in the public eye. And something quieter and perhaps more lasting than any of it. The irony. Kyle Busch bought life insurance to protect his family after he was gone. That insurance, those specific policies from that specific company, became the instrument of the largest financial loss of his life. He fought to recover what was taken. He settled. He died. And now Samantha is navigating exactly what Kyle spent his entire career trying to prevent. Does that feel like justice to you? Does any part of that timeline feel like the system worked the way it was supposed to? Because here is what Kyle Busch's story actually is, beneath the headlines and the lawsuit and the settlement and the numbers. It is a story about trust. About the specific, devastating vulnerability of trusting people whose incentives are not aligned with your survival. About the way institutions dress exploitation in the language of protection. About the gap, sometimes enormous, sometimes catastrophic, between what a product promises and what it delivers. Kyle Busch had 2 championships and a megaphone. He used it. The question that lingers now in the quiet following his death is whether anyone is listening. Whether the industry changes because a famous man pointed at it and named what it was doing. Whether the teachers and the retirees and the small business owners filing their own paperwork in their own offices, without cameras or platforms or the weight of a famous name, will find the same courage and face a more responsive system because Kyle and Samantha Busch stood up first. We do not know what the settlement recovered. Those doors are closed and they will remain closed. What we know is this. A man spent 20 years racing at 200 miles per hour so his family would be safe. He trusted the wrong institution with the money he earned doing it. He fought back, publicly, loudly, at personal cost, because he understood that his voice could do something for people whose voices the industry had learned to ignore. He settled in February. He was gone by May. And somewhere in Charlotte, North Carolina, 2 children are growing up with the story of a father who, even when the system took from him, refused to let it take his silence too.